giving me a headache.
Yeah, tell me about it. It took the hackers months to figure out how to do this.
The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. They have created a repressive society, and we are their unwitting accomplices. Please understand, they are safe as long as they are not discovered. That is their primary method of survival. To keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
Welcome to another Boer Republic podcast. Today we are honored to have the well-known and often infamous satirist and cartoonist Jerm on the podcast. Well known for his sharp commentary regarding South African current affairs, he often upsets those who are easily offended by his drawings. And on that note, thank you for joining us, Jerm. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We really look forward to this conversation. I think it's a very good one to have, especially in today's current political climate. So before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the issues, could you perhaps give us a bit of a background regarding your work and what led you up to this point in time regarding your cartoons, what you've done and what you've been able to achieve, especially through the use of satire?
Sure. Well, the very short story is that I left my corporate job in 2005. I was retrenched. I was in mobile technology, sort of research and development. I've always had a heart for tech matters, and without any qualifications, I tried really hard to get into the newspapers, and it took about 2 years actually before I got anywhere significant. And then from about 2007 onwards, I had a lucky opportunity to draw for the Times, which was at that stage a newly launched daily subsidiary of the Sunday Times. And then from there, it just kind of grew bit by bit. I didn't have any political views at that stage, and very, very quickly changed. I was a bit of a lefty at that stage, as I suppose lots of young people are. And then as I became more familiar with our political landscape, I started seeing the fabrications coming from within the media and the government, and I started becoming a whole lot more skeptical, and I suppose one could say red-pilled. But I see the world today through a lens of principles and values rather than, say, left-right politics. And I guess for the most part, you would see some of that stuff as well, not you, but the media tend to see it as alt-right or right-wing or racist or sexist or all those labels that I've had so many times. But it's quite fun, actually, getting those labels, because it just means that what I'm doing is probably correct. And yeah, so that's where I am today in a nutshell. I left the mainstream media pretty much in 2016 and started pushing into, there isn't really a term for it, but I would use the term alternative media, which is not really newspapers as such, but more organizations and groups and basically any outlet that isn't the traditional mainstream format. Having said that, I currently draw for Report newspaper, which is a fairly large mainstream publication. But for the most part, I'm not in the mainstream anymore, and I'm very happy to be in that place. And I do have 2 books, by the way. They were published between 2012 and 2014, and I'm hopefully going to work on my 3rd book in the next year or so.
It's easier to reach a larger audience by going out on your own, and with the technology of social media and everything that you have, it's so easy, and the amount of platforms that are available to bring your work straight to the consumer itself.
Yeah, I think you are correct, but it's not an easy industry to be in. I wouldn't recommend people becoming cartoonists. It's not something you can study, and you have to either work for a publication and sit in their office if you really want to have stability, or if you want to work from home like I do. It's very unstable, and you have to constantly find creative ways or think out of the box in order to survive. I've been drawing now for 13 years, and I would say for the most part I'm quite stable, and I think I'm very fortunate that I've made a living from what I do. But I know a lot of cartoonists struggle a huge amount, and unless your name starts with a Z, you're very much going to struggle as a cartoonist in this country.
Yeah, we have no idea what you're talking about there with some. On the other hand, as well, I mean, the one thing about South Africa is that, there's no lack of things to talk and write about. Would you say there is ample amounts of material for cartoonists? So if ever there's a place to create, it probably is South Africa.
Definitely. It's almost as if there's too much material. I mean, often the cartoons are written for me, and I feel like I'm plagiarizing because there's no gag. I mean, sometimes Julius Malema would say such crazy things that there's nothing more I can do to it to make a cartoon.
Sometimes non-fiction is the fiction. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's the absurd thing is when people from outside South Africa look in, foreigners, and they look into the way South African politics is run, the way our society is run, yet they often can't believe how absurd it is. And that's one thing that one needs to stress and put importance on, is that this is a very, very absurd place. Like you say, the gags almost write themselves.
That's what cartooning is about. I mean, cartooning is about taking something to the absurd. But how do you take something to the absurd when it is already absurd?
No, definitely. Speaking of absurd situations, I think it's quite topical to mention the current land expropriation issue. Through your work, you've made good headway in exposing some of the stuff, in poking fun at the issues involved, as well as basically bringing awareness of the situation. And that being said, satire is a very good way of bringing out those uncomfortable topics and thus being able to laugh at it and at least maybe diffuse the strife or the emotion involved. But that being said, how do you see the current land expropriation process unfolding? You've even done a bit of, and in the same vein, could you also talk about some of your activist work that you've been doing lately regarding that?
Well, firstly, I don't see myself as an activist, although I suppose when it comes to something as extreme as land expropriation, any kind of opposition to it now would be considered activism because it's such a serious issue. So I did attend the final public hearing, which was a joke, but all the public hearings have been a joke. They've been completely hijacked by, pretty much the EFF. But we do know that the written submissions are far more numerous and greater in number than the verbal submissions from the various hearings. Not that it seems to matter to the ANC, but my position on land expropriation is not in any way balanced. I'm completely opposed to it. I think that it's a great travesty to forcefully take property that belongs to somebody who bought it legally. And for the most part, I do agree with land restitution, which is not the same thing as redistribution. If something was legitimately stolen or taken, then that must be given back. But it obviously gets complicated because you can't just walk onto property and go, well, my family lived at that spot over there, because anybody can make up stuff. And you go down a very slippery slope if you just start believing hearsay. There has to, unfortunately, be proper legal processes involved with that. And of course, we know that I think small numbers of people are not interested in the legal processes. I just think that small number of people is very vocal, and the EFF seems to be a loudspeaker for that. So my position is that we must oppose the amendment to Section 25 at all costs. It's critical to our economy. I mean, once property rights become handicapped, then we start sliding down into an abyss.
We very much agree with that stance. And our feeling is that, all these public hearings and, all the announcements by Ramaphosa himself, or just all the positions they've taken in the last few months, is basically a massive distraction to, as you say, the people who obviously don't believe in property rights and using.
I don't think it's about property at all, or land. I've said it a couple of times. I mean, you have to attend, or you have to have attended the public hearings to understand that. It's got nothing to do with property or land. It's got everything to do with revenge, and revenge against white people in particular. I mean, and saying that, people go, oh, that seems racist. But go to one of those public hearings, well, not that you can anymore, but having gone to one of those public hearings and hearing the way people there speak, you realize that this is about getting revenge for stuff that people before us did.
Yeah. But luckily, we do have the internet, so we can retrospectively go and, I mean, you need to spend a day or two on Twitter, and then you can find one of those videos. And I 100%, again, it seems as though those people were given a short speech that they didn't always memorize too well, probably given to them by the EFF, and there to obviously spill out hateful rhetoric. And but I agree with you that this type of hate has been built up for so long, for so many generations, and what we probably will witness is the physical manifestation of that, as you say, from a minority who's willing to enact on this hatred, which the politicians are obviously agreeing with.
And the thing is, the ANC are losing the electorate. They're not trusted by the electorate as much as they were years ago, and so they're looking for ways now to increase their votes.
Well, it seems as if that a few years ago their rhetoric was of such a nature that they didn't really bother about issues that we are currently facing. The biggest issue was Zuma's corruption and Zuma's personal life. Julius Malema, filled a niche and basically took away more radical elements from the ANC. And rightly you say so, that the ANC has changed their rhetoric so that they don't lose their voter base to the EFF as well as to Black First, Land First. So it's definitely the case.
Well, I think that the EFF is going to split next year, if not before then. And I do think that Julius Malema is going to go back to the ANC. I said this many months ago, and I do maintain it. I think that the top brass of the EFF are going to rejoin the ANC and take EFF members with them to strengthen the ANC again. And then Malema is going to come out saying, "I never left the ANC." And it's a weird situation that we're finding ourselves in, because there's this weird, and I can't pin it, but there's this weird animosity or this weird hatred for what seems to be white people, and of course Afrikaans white people in South Africa, and it seems to be gaining momentum. The further away we get from apartheid, the more momentum this animosity seems to expand. It's the strangest thing. I thought it would have been the other way around. And we see it, for example, how the government is trying to clamp down on all things Afrikaans. Now, most farmers are Afrikaans. It's weird. It's either just coincidental or it's part of a more sinister strategy that I as I said, I can't quite pin.
No, but I think blacks in this country, they are going to grow up and experience economic prosperity. Those are the promises they don't just get from the government, from society as a whole, that they will grow up, they'll become part of the middle class. And, the more the bigger way, the further we go from apartheid, obviously the better our lives will get economically, because we're separated from our times of oppression. And then you are brought up with a generation of your parents telling you to hate the white man, especially the Afrikaner, is always and now with those two curves are sort of directly in opposition. You kind of realize the older that you get that I still have to work harder and harder to be economically prosperous, for which I would say would come easier, and hence then you have to blame someone else, because it's very difficult for people to take self-responsibility. For me, that's kind of the idea, is why this animosity grows. And then there's kind of a threshold where some people just turn and they say, well, I have to turn to crime, and they aim the crime at the one that they've been told to hate for the last few generations.
Well, yeah, there's also a definite correlation globally, in fact, between radicalized or extremist groups and economic hardship. Wherever you see prosperity and stronger middle classes growing globally, you see fewer extreme groups. And the EFF and BLF are definitely extreme groups.
In that sense, it's probably also, I don't know if it's a sub-feeling of, in a sense, probably one of the ways we can actually compete. Because as you've known, with all the BEE laws, more than 100 laws that prevent white South Africans, especially males, to get certain jobs, as you've experienced.
Yeah.
Kind of forces us to become entrepreneurs. I mean, it's the same. We've all had to start our own businesses. You do your own thing. You have to become your own boss. And in essence, it actually just makes you stronger. It kind of more evolved. And in the generally, you'll come out on top if you're your own boss and if you make it. And that just creates more resentment.
Yeah. Well, entrepreneurship is always a good thing. Let's be honest. Nobody really wants to work for a boss.
No, that's
for sure.
Yeah.
You can drink on the job.
So speaking of drinking on the job, our government isn't exactly very efficient. That's no secret. what has struck many people is that for some reason there seems to be somewhat of a sudden move towards efficiency, especially where land expropriation is concerned. Recently, we've had a list of farms that have come out to say, but these are the farms that are possibly targeted for expropriation or for state capture. And AfriForum was blasted in the news because they released it, were blamed for being conspiracy theorists. And then news came out that 2 of the farms, right at the top of this supposed list, have been taken by the government. Your thoughts on this, perhaps?
Well, I mean, we must obviously believe the media, and we must obviously believe the ANC. If they say no list exists, then well, no list exists, and we must carry on searching for the rainbow and the unicorns and the pot of gold. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Okay, so how can you say that you're going to expropriate farms and that you're going to select farms for possible expropriation? Then, when you get caught out, you turn around and you say, "Oh, but there's no list." and then what makes it even funnier is that you get guys like Arjun Basson and Peter Du Toit at News 24 slamming AfriForum and saying, "Well, you guys are creating panic." Well, yes, I would definitely panic if the government says it's going to come and take land. I mean, it's not something you stick your head in the ground over. You don't suddenly pretend that everything's going to be okay. You must get that information, and you must get it out there, because obviously, if the ANC is trying to keep it secret, it's because they want to make it harder for the farmers when the farmers get approached, because it's much easier to derail them and to throw them off guard when you suddenly approach them than if you give them 6-12 months to plan and prepare. So it's obvious that the list is legit. Whether or not it's exactly those 190 farms is irrelevant. The fact that a list even exists is atrocious.
Yeah, that's sort of that's one thing that really stands out is the government seems to, and it's true. I mean that it is a clear tactic. If they come and they surprise you and get you off guard, then you don't actually have much time to prepare. And the farmers are well known for being prepared and for preparing. It's.
Well, that's what happened in Zimbabwe. When the guys, the ZANU-PF guys, just pitched up on the ground and they hung around with guns, saying you've got 12 hours to leave. Then what? You can do nothing.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that also really stands out about the lists is, there does seem to be quite a bit of legitimacy around it. And the one thing that really strikes us is that most of the people making these announcements for land to be taken, that land must be returned to the people. I thought, all of us are. Yeah, I mean, I thought all of us are supposed to be the people of the Rainbow Nation, but it seems there are clear distinctions being drawn, especially where in-groups are concerned. And the one thing that really, sort of gets us going is most of these guys who are making announcements for land expropriation, for land that needs to be taken, given back to whomever, most of them have hectares and hectares of their own land. Why not offer them to the people first to see how it goes, if you want to be so giving?
Because, as I said earlier, it's not about land. I mean, I mentioned to you before we started the podcast that I was in the Karoo a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to be a farmer. Firstly, I don't want land there, okay? Secondly, I don't know anybody who'd want to own big tracts of land there unless they have it in their blood. It's a very different kind of lifestyle. There is no rain. There are no dams. You have to bore holes into the ground to get water. It's a hard life. I'm much happier staying in the city. And for some strange reason, 30 million people want to suddenly be farmers. It's hilarious. The whole thing is messed up. All the data shows constantly, okay, that people prefer living in urban areas than in rural areas. So this idea that farms are going to get expropriated, I don't know what's going to happen on those farms. A lot of them are far away from any kind of city center, any kind of urban build-up. So what are they going to do? So the land's been taken. Now what? They're not going to build housing complexes there. It's too far away from anything.
This is where the question arises. What's the end game? Who benefits from this rhetoric?
Because I think that it's A, about revenge, and B, it's about more government control. And that sounds conspiratorial, but I don't think it is at all. I genuinely think it's about more government control. The more the government can control, then the more say it can have and the more clout it can have in its decision making.
Well, we all know that most of the leadership, they've been kind of brought up in communist. In essence, they do, I think, truly believe that communism is the best way. I agree with you. A lot of that is mixed in with hatred to the white. As you said, you used the word panic. How will you actually incite panic amongst white people in South Africa? We've seen in a few weeks that the ANC and again mainstream media has proved that there's no legitimacy to their claims and they can openly lie to us. And as Ramaphosa has said before, and this illustration that we have, and I think you've even used it in your cartoons, with the idea of a frog in slowly boiling water. And my feeling is always I don't see the same amount of panic and urgency amongst people, even though they're hearing so much vitriol and hatred spewed towards them directly. And I don't know if that's a mixture of just denial or just, pure busyness with taxes and all kinds of regulations, or a sense of nihilism because, the end is nigh and there's not much we can do. How would you go about, and obviously I'm sure you try and do it through your cartoons, how would you go about, creating panic against, among white South Africans so that we could stand up? Because it is kind of a watershed moment. Like, yes, we've just read this morning, 2 farms on the non-existent list, which is taking, supposedly not stealing, is being taken. Surely this should be a watershed moment where everyone should put their tools down, put the newspapers down, walk out of the church pews and go and fight for their own race.
Well, okay, so I've got to be careful here. I don't think it's, on the one hand, I don't think it's a race war. I think that the changes to Section 25 of the Constitution will harm all South Africans. I don't think it will harm just white South Africans, as we often hear. I think the people who are going to get impacted negatively the most are definitely the black, poorer people, of which there are millions, because their property rights will also be eradicated, or any chances of having property rights, because they'll end up having to rent from the state, lease, and it's a mess. Having said that, I also do think that there is some sort of political attack on white Afrikaners, farmers more specifically. So I think it's a multi-pronged tactic that the ANC is incorporating, and the EFF. But in terms of spreading panic, okay, so I don't think panic per se is a good thing because it clouds any kind of rational judgment. You don't want people just going berserk, because then you end up with very, very stupid things happening. What you want is a sense of panic, if that makes sense. It is that serious. It's like if there's a war and sirens go off and you know that there are jets or bombers coming over your city. Yes, you definitely want a sense of panic because it's urgent, but you don't want to panic, if that makes sense, because then you won't be able to get out of there. You'll just end up causing more chaos, and then you'll die in the process. So what you want is a sense of panic, and then you want to use that sense of panic as a tool to make the best kind of decision. I don't know. Am I making sense?
No, 100%. I mean, panic is a thing to irrationality. Sure.
Yeah. So then, with that, I don't know. It's difficult to have a solution to this, but I do think that there needs to be a collective and a very aggressive response. My work is certainly the most aggressive that it's ever been. I've never been this aggressive in my commentary, and I certainly don't mind becoming even more aggressive because it's that serious. There is definitely a problem within a lot of the mainstream media in which journalists and editors seem to put their head in the ground like an ostrich. And I won't say names. Peter du Toit. Sorry, something in my throat there. But I don't know why they're trying to dilute it and make it as if it's not a serious thing. It might be because they believe in the Rainbow Nation and they believe in a prosperous future, and so they don't want to accept that there is a strong possibility that the ANC is going to send us down the toilet. But that is a reality, and it can very, very well happen. So my thinking is that people just need to speak out, to use their freedom of expression to the max, whether it's protesting, whether it's, in my case, drawing cartoons, whether it's doing talk shows on TV, whether it's doing podcasts like this, and trying to influence the conversation. I mean, AfriForum have been traveling around the world. That's brilliant. I support that. Despite the fact that they get lots of hate for it, it's the right thing to do. They need to inform people that we are potentially on a road to devastation. It's not a joke, and we only have so much power, but collectively we can have quite a lot of power if we don't fight amongst one another.
No, I mean, I would like to, and I think I agree with you there. And I'd like to shift a little bit of gears and sort of more practical question, if you don't mind, because at the moment, we're under the press of communism, and I've seen on your cartoons, and like some people have commented on Twitter that, are you becoming an anarchist? And obviously you said you spent time with Roman Kavanagh before, who's a out and out an anarchist. What are your philosophical worldviews on, especially something like that compared to, as we see in South Africa, we were supposedly a democracy, and in a very short time, because generally the view is socialism, democracy always ends up in authoritarian communism.
Yeah, you can stop right there. I know exactly where you're going with your question. It's a wonderful question.
Thanks.
All right, let me go back a little bit, just to give some context. So when I started out as a cartoonist about 13 years ago, goodness me, 13 years ago, I can't believe it. I was, I suppose, a bit of a lefty, but then again, I also didn't really know much about political views. So I just thought that if you want to help the people, then you must support a union. It's a very naive way of thinking, because unions support the people. But when you start seeing the reality, you realize that it's nonsense, and you start maturing. At least I did. And in about 2016, it was a very big turning point for me. I was living in Mossel Bay for a year, an absolutely gorgeous part of the world. I'll go back there in a heartbeat. And I started leaving the mainstream media because I was finding myself fighting far too much with editors and journalists, and I was getting censored way too much for my liking. And it was frustrating me because I couldn't understand if I was doing something wrong or if I was just being misunderstood. And it turns out that I was just maturing in my worldviews, and it wasn't connecting with the popular mindset, which tends to lean very much to the left of center, ideologically speaking. And I found myself becoming more and more critical of that, more and more anti-left, I think would be a nice way to say it, because I didn't support a lot of those political ideologies. And because I don't like labels, I've kind of disconnected myself from right-wing or alt-right or left-wing. But I think for the sake of conversation, you could probably slot me into anything that's right of center, I guess. But I don't like labels because I don't want to be confined to a predetermined set of definitions. I see the world in a particular way, and I go, well, that's right or that's wrong. And if that's left-wing, then so be it. For example, I don't think that the church and the state should be connected. I think they should be disconnected. And as far as I know, that's a left-wing ideological philosophy. But if you think about it, everything else seems to be quite right of sense. I mean, I'm very much in favor of the individual and my right to have a gun and freedom, and I want to be able to say what I like in a public space, that is. I mean, I'm not completely in favor of free speech because it doesn't exist. I can't come into your home and start talking smack about your family. You'll go, hey, there's the door, leave.
Well,
so
you can, but it has its consequences.
Yeah, correct. So the whole free speech discussion itself is quite loaded. You're not going to shout bomb on an airplane. You don't have that freedom, because otherwise you're going to cause unbelievable hysteria and panic and possibly an air disaster. But I mean, I think for the most part, philosophically, I probably align far more with, I guess, anti-state thinking. I don't really see too much need for a government. I think anything the government can do can be done pretty efficiently by the private sector. I'm a bit conflicted on a few things like intellectual property. I do have my conflicts there. I'm not quite sure which way to lean. And I'm a bit conflicted on things like the border and how necessary borders are. I do know that if there were a war in South Africa and I wanted to escape with my family, I wouldn't want to have to go through border control and visa requirements to enter another country. I would love to just freely move there. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think a better way having this discussion is actually asking more specific questions. I'm pro legalization of drugs. I think the best way to fight drug abuse is actually with decriminalization of the drugs. Stop getting the state to run after drug users and put them into jail, because that's not going to help them. What will help them is social structures like rehabilitation, and that's all privately funded. And I don't want to pay for somebody else's drug habits. I think that the private police force is far superior to a state police force, and we already can see that. I mean, private security in South Africa is 3 times larger than the police. So we know that the public trust private police or private security more than they trust the police. So I'm struggling to see anything that the state can do or the government can do that the private sector can't do. So where does it put me ideologically?
Yeah, no, it's always a problem. People always want to put labels there, and I agree with you. Labels are just a way so that you can know where to align. But yeah, I mean, the idea of communism is the sense that you have almost no control. And
obviously I hate communism. I don't like the state, for example, controlling people to that degree. I mean, yeah, we can agree on that. But I mean, what I'm saying is, if you wanted to place me somewhere, I guess you could say a classical liberal or maybe an anarchist to some degree. I'm not sold on the idea of anarchism completely, because I do see some role for the state. I'm just not quite sure what that role is, but I do see some role. Like, I mean, if we were attacked now by our neighboring countries with military, what's going to happen then if we don't have our own military?
Yeah, no, that is a big issue. It's, especially if someone has a nuke and we don't have a nuke and we just got about rented guns.
Having said that, do we even have a military, or are they all lost in Burundi somewhere?
Well, what they do have is they've got a submarine to patrol the border for sharks, which I feel safe when I go out to surf. So
I thought that submarine doesn't work.
Not anymore. No, our military is woefully inadequate. We mentioned previously that any chance of victory that they might have over another army is as living biological weapons, and that's in the form of HIV infections.
Let me answer your question another way. If I were made president of the country, I would dissolve every department in existence, and then I would fire myself.
That's a perfect answer. I don't think you can't really put it better. Would you even have the position of firing yourself? Sure.
I would just walk away and go start another job.
That answers it.
Then it brings the obvious question: would you ensure that you've got an Nkandla before then, or would you not even go down that route?
Well, I'd make sure that I've got a Wakandla.
Yeah, that's also true. So
look. Jokes aside, I think the problem is not really about left or right. Although, I mean, it's nice to on Twitter and in conversation, it's easy because they're catch-all phrases and we all kind of know what we're talking about, I suppose. But I think when we really just remove those labels at the top, what it all really comes down to is freedom versus oppression. That's really what it's about. I can't think for one moment that there is a single person who lives in this country who wants to be oppressed. I think our human desire is to be free. Okay, that's the first thing. And in order to be free, we must be able to make our own choices and not be forced to make choices. Being forced to pay for this and being forced to pay for that and being forced to live with people you don't want to live with. All of that is a violation of our innate desire to be free. And once we start losing that sense of freedom, we start retaliating and pushing back, and we start seeing things like Orania, which I completely support. I see nothing wrong with people creating little collections of like-mindedness because they want to be able to make those choices freely and not be forced to live amongst people they don't want to. Now, I live in a complex and I've got all kinds of people around me and I'm very happy where I live. I chose the area. You know, I didn't have to live here. And should I have any problems, I'll go and speak to the people. But if I were forced to live next door to somebody who has a cultural practice that I don't approve of, A, that'll probably make me a racist in the media, but B, it has nothing to do with race. It just has to do with what I am used to. I don't necessarily like the idea of people slaughtering cows in their back garden. Now, that's got nothing to do with race. That might have to do with religion. You know, I'm not Muslim, So I don't slaughter cows in a certain way, for example. And if that's done in cultural practice next door to me, I'm not going to like that. So I probably will moan. But that doesn't mean that that I'm racist. Of course, that's the term that everybody likes to use. And in fact, having said that, I think most people are not racist. I don't really have evidence to support that. So you are welcome to challenge me. But I do think that people who are racist are few and far between. I think most people are culturalists. People struggle with cultural practices or cultural behavior that's foreign to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're all different. We all come from cultural upbringings that are different. If you look at countries like Japan, where there's a lot more cultural homogeny, you find that people tend to have conflict less with one another than where you see multiculturalism. I know, for example, Lauren Southern is very outspoken about the dangers of multiculturalism, and I don't think multiculturalism is a successful model. Can only be successful if it's voluntary. If it's forced, it's not going to be successful. It's the same thing as having a forced marriage. If you don't have your choices, or if you have your freedoms removed from you, you're going to find conflict, and that goes in one big circle. I'll come back to my first point about our innate desire to be free. And I think that's what all of this comes down to, is freedom versus oppression.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I like the dichotomy of freedom and oppression. I'd probably take it even a little bit further, that it's basically rationality against irrationality. The idea that you can, like what a state does, the idea that you can choose for another individual what they have to do with their money, and it's basically saying I can mind read, which is obviously irrational. But I am going to disagree on one point with you, in that say no one wants to be suppressed. But if we look at the book sales of 50 Shades of Grey, we know that a large woman.
Listen, show me where those women are. I need to go find them.
Well, they're not in our listenership, so we can't help you there. But
you guys are useless.
Since August is a bit of a trial by fire month, or a baptism by fire month, we've got amendment to the Constitution, and whether or not we'll see any significant change or regarding that whole process, or whether or not the consequences have already been set in motion before the action has even been taken, where do you see the country headed then? If we consider what's already happened in the month of August, where do you see South Africa headed in the next few months, at least?
I don't see any radical changes happening before the elections. I think we will start seeing gradual changes. In actual fact, for the most part, I see gradual changes happening in South Africa. I don't foresee too many drastic or immediate changes happening, but I do foresee an interesting set of events which I think are very much aligned with what the Institute of Race Relations have said, in that we're going to start seeing more and more pods like Orania popping up, where people are going to start forming communities in order to help one another, because they're being targeted so much now by corruption and just absolute government failures. We're going to see more groups like AfriForum forming, I think, where they go out and do what the government was supposed to do. And worst case scenario, I see in a generation, we're going to start seeing South Africa losing its status, maybe sooner, losing its status as the sort of the lighthouse, the success model of the continent, and becoming just another African country. And I see a couple other countries overtaking us because of their government models are possibly more beneficial to economic growth. I think Botswana and Mauritius are two countries to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's definitely a few success stories, if any, in Africa itself. And the way things are headed, I think we're in for interesting times.
Well, it's the chieftain peasant model, which seems to reside very much in the minds of African leaders, where democratic thinking, although, I'm not in favor of democracy as a whole, but it's still better than many African models. And they don't seem to be highly successful. And yet they perpetuate them by continuing these failed models of sort of chieftain mindsets. You can't have a village way of operating in a country of millions of people.
Especially one as culturally diverse as South Africa. I mean, we've got 11 official languages. To administer...
What does that even mean?
To administer a population like that is impossible.
Well, that's why I support secession. I'm the first to rally behind the Zulu Kingdom seceding and the Western Cape seceding. Very, very happy to support. I think that smaller populations can be a lot more successful than larger populations.
What other potential solutions would you suggest for anyone listening, especially our South African audience, who might feel that they don't know where to turn to or what to do?
Convince as many people as possible not to vote the ANC next year, and certainly not the EFF. And although I'm no fan of the DA, for goodness sake, get rid of the ANC and the EFF. Those two parties are dangerous for our future. They've had their time. Well, the ANC's had its time now. And power corrupts. What's that saying? Power corrupts. Power corrupts absolutely.
There's definitely corruption on so many levels where our ruling party and the government in general is concerned. Look at any city in South Africa. Maybe Cape Town is debatable, but at least all the other cities where the ANC has had long-lasting rule, and you'll see an immense deterioration and a huge.
If Section 25 goes ahead, if Section 25 gets amended, I would suggest not being stupid. I would strongly suggest looking at your options outside of this country. And I know it sounds very negative and pessimistic, but I'm being realistic. Section 25 is a critical part of the Constitution. And once property rights get eroded, your future is not set in stone anymore. And if you still want to live here, that's fine, but then at least set up your options, make your exit strategy a little bit easier for over the next few years. But that Section 25 amendment is what you want to keep your eyes on.
As we wind down here, please tell the audience where they can reach your work, where they can perhaps interact with you on social media and any other relevant links that you might want to share.
Cool. Well, thank you for the opportunity. The easiest is my website, jerm.coza, Jerm, like the virus, but with the J. And from there, you can find me, I guess, on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter, I only joined recently, maybe a month or two ago. I was off for about 2 years, and what a wonderful experience it was not being on Twitter for 2 years. On Twitter, you can find me at my name is Jerm, and the same handle on Facebook, facebook.com/my name is Jerm. But it's just much easier to go to my website, and then from there you can find your way around to where you want to see me and my work.
And you've got a Patreon account, isn't that correct?
Yes, I do. So that's an experiment that I started about 2 months ago, in which I wanted to push the limits of free speech. And the best way seems to be by getting normal readers, individuals, to fund me. Small amounts per month, same as AfriForum and Outer, for example, where you get individuals to fund the work that you do. And I've got nearly 40 patrons now, and it's going quite well. I mean, if it picks up, I could definitely see myself removing all my clients and working purely with patrons. It's a wonderful experience to have that kind of freedom where you don't have anybody censoring you. And in fact, patrons collaborate and work with me. It's a beautiful experience, and long may that continue. So you can find me there on patreon.com/my name is Jerm.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us for this podcast and having a very stimulating conversation. We'd love to have you on again.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Definitely. You're more than welcome to come on again. We'd love to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
I apologize. It's been a little bit dark and depressing.
No, unfortunately, the way things go is we need to get these dark realities out so that we can find the light, I suppose, if one wants to be poetic.
Let's do another podcast in the near future, and we'll make sure that it's more upbeat.
Definitely. Anyway, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. Take it easy.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to another Boer Republic podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And if this message resonates with you, please spread it as far as you can. Your support is appreciated. Any feedback is encouraged, and we look forward to engaging with you on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, gab.ai, minds.com, Steemit, YouTube, DTube, BitChute, and PewTube, as well as on wrongthink.net. We update as regularly as we can, so please follow us and reach out to us. Until next time, stay safe wherever you may find yourself.